My grandfather kept a worn leather notebook locked in the top drawer of his oak dresser. Inside were 47 pages of handwritten notes, drawings of root cellars, measurements for smokehouse construction, a recipe for lye soap that used ashes from the fireplace, sketches for a rainwater collection system, notes on how to butcher a hog without wasting a single inch of the animal. When I was 9 years old, he sat me down at the kitchen table and started going through it with me, page by page. He said, "Boy, everything in this book, somebody today would call illegal, dangerous, or just plain crazy." He wasn't being dramatic. He meant it. By the time my grandfather was born in 1921, every single skill in that notebook had been practiced by ordinary American families for generations. Not because they wanted to break the law, but because they had no other choice. They grew their own food, preserved it themselves, built their own structures, treated their own illnesses, and produced their own energy. They were, by every modern standard, completely self-sufficient. And somewhere between 1950 and today, almost every one of those skills was quietly classified as a health hazard, a zoning violation, a building code infraction, or a public safety risk. Before you scroll past, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Because number 3 on this list is one that will genuinely surprise you, and number 1 is the skill that made my grandfather angrier than anything else when he realized it had been taken away. Number 25 was the first thing my grandfather showed me in that notebook, and it was so simple it almost seemed like a joke: collecting and storing rainwater. Today, in multiple states across America, collecting rainwater from your own roof into your own barrels is restricted, regulated, or outright illegal without a permit. In some jurisdictions, you can face fines. In others, the water that falls from the sky onto your property technically doesn't belong to you. It belongs to downstream water rights holders, a legal framework that was designed for large-scale agriculture, but has been applied in ways that criminalize families for setting out a 55-gallon drum under a downspout. My grandfather collected rainwater his entire adult life. He had a series of wooden barrels along the back of the barn, fed by gutters he'd fashioned from split cedar logs. That water watered the kitchen garden, filled the animals' troughs during dry spells, and was boiled for laundry. It cost nothing, required no infrastructure, and wasted nothing. He thought it was the most natural thing in the world, and by modern law in some parts of this country, he'd have been fined for it. Number 24 is one that most people don't realize was ever normal: burning wood or trash in your own backyard. Before municipal waste collection, before natural gas lines ran to every home, rural families burned. They burned brush, they burned garbage, they burned fallen timber. Open burning was how you cleared land, disposed of waste, and heated your home. Today, open burning regulations in most counties require permits, prohibit burning within certain distances of structures, ban the burning of anything other than untreated wood, and in many urban adjacent areas, ban it entirely. Backyard burning is classified as an air quality issue, and in some jurisdictions even burning leaves in autumn will earn you a fine. The families who built this country on smoke and fire would not recognize a single sentence of those regulations. Number 23 is slaughtering your own animals. This one might sound extreme to people who have never lived on a farm, but for most of American history, killing and butchering your own livestock was simply what you did in November. Hog killing day was a community event. Neighbors came, everyone had a job. The whole animal was used. The lard rendered, the sausage mixed, the hams hung in the smokehouse, the feet pickled, the head made into head cheese. Today, in most states, you can kill animals for your own personal consumption without a license. But the moment you share or sell any portion of that animal, even give a neighbor a pound of pork, you are typically required to have had it processed in a USDA-inspected facility. The community sharing that was once the foundation of rural food culture has been effectively legislated out of existence. Number 22 is making raw milk cheese. Cheese made from unpasteurized milk was the standard for thousands of years. Every farmhouse that kept cows or goats made it. The flavor is incomparably richer, the bacterial culture is complex and alive. Today, the FDA prohibits the interstate sale of raw milk cheeses aged less than 60 days, and many states have additional restrictions on production and sale. The families who spent generations perfecting their cheese-making techniques were not poisoning anyone. They were feeding their communities with a living food their bodies had adapted to over centuries. Number 21 is building your own structures without permits. Before zoning laws and building codes, a man who owned land built what he needed on it. He built a barn, a smokehouse, a root cellar, a second cabin for a married child. He built these things according to what he knew and what his neighbors had taught him and what had worked for generations. Today, any structure over a certain square footage, in many jurisdictions, anything permanent at all, requires a permit, an inspection, engineered drawings, and compliance with codes that vary by county. Families who have tried to build simple structures on rural land have been ordered to tear them down and fined thousands of dollars. The land is yours. The building, apparently, is not. Number 20 is using medicinal herbs to treat illness. Before pharmaceutical companies, before the FDA, before licensed physicians were available in every county, rural families treated sickness with what grew around them. Elderberry for fever, yarrow for wounds, comfrey root poultice for broken bones, plantain leaves for bee stings, willow bark tea for pain. Every grandmother had a medicine cabinet that was also a garden. Today, herbalists cannot legally make medical claims for their products. Selling herbal remedies is governed by FTC and FDA regulations. Practicing herbalism as medicine without a medical license exists in a legal gray zone that varies by state, but universally carries risk of prosecution if something goes wrong. Number 19 is drilling your own water well. On rural land throughout most of American history, if you needed water, you dug or drilled a well. You found the water, you cased it, you pumped from it. Today, in most states, well drilling requires a licensed driller, a permit, water quality testing, and compliance with setback regulations that specify how far the well must be from septic systems, property lines, and other features. The process can cost thousands of dollars and take months. Families who have tried to drill their own wells have been fined and ordered to cap them. The water under your land is, in many jurisdictions, not yours to access without government permission. Number 18 is saving seeds. Before hybrid seeds, before Monsanto and patent law, before seed catalogs even existed, every farming family saved seeds. You grew your corn, you picked the best ears, you dried them, you stored them in the barn, and you planted them next spring. The seeds were the farm's inheritance, passed from generation to generation, adapted over decades to the specific soil and climate of that particular piece of ground. Today, saving seeds from patented plant varieties is a federal intellectual property violation. Farmers have been sued, and lost, for saving seed from crops grown on their own land that happen to be cross-pollinated by a neighbor's patented variety. The seed that once belonged to the family that grew it now belongs to the corporation that holds the patent. If you're still watching, drop a comment below with the word seeds. I want to know how many of you knew this was happening. Number 17 is hunting and fishing without license restrictions. For most of American history, if you lived near water, you fished it. If deer came through your land, you shot one for the winter. This wasn't sport, it was protein. The concept of a hunting license was introduced in the late 1800s and expanded through the early 1900s as a conservation measure, which it was and is. But the licensing structure has evolved into a complex system of seasons, bag limits, tags, and fees that can make subsistence hunting genuinely difficult for low-income rural families who are simply trying to eat. My grandfather hunted deer every fall without ever thinking about a license. The system he lived under did not exist yet. Number 16 is making your own alcohol. Home distillation of spirits, moonshine, whiskey, brandy, any distilled liquor, is still a federal felony in the United States. It has been since Prohibition-era laws were only partially rolled back. Home brewing of beer and wine for personal use was legalized in 1978. But distillation remains illegal without a federal distiller's permit, which costs thousands of dollars and requires compliance with TTB regulations. The Scots-Irish families who settled Appalachia had been distilling grain into whiskey for generations in their home country. They brought the skill to America, where it promptly became a source of conflict with the federal government, a conflict that, by the way, helped spark the Whiskey Rebellion of 1794. The skill is as old as this nation. The felony is too. Number 15 is foraging on public land. Gathering wild plants, berries, mushrooms, medicinal herbs, nuts, from public forests and parks is restricted in most jurisdictions. In national parks, removing any plant material is prohibited. In national forests, foraging is technically allowed in small quantities for personal use, but commercial foraging requires a permit. State parks vary wildly. The act of walking into the woods and taking home food that grows freely from the earth, which human beings have done for hundreds of thousands of years, now requires navigating a bureaucratic maze that most people don't know exists. Number 14 is off-grid solar and wind power. Before the rural electrification programs of the 1930s and 1940s, rural America was mostly off-grid because it had no other choice. Families ran generators, used kerosene lamps, and did without electrical appliances. Today, the irony is that choosing to generate your own power from solar panels or wind turbines is restricted in many jurisdictions. HOA rules in suburban areas frequently prohibit visible solar installations. Some utilities have fought, and won, in state legislatures to prevent customers from going fully off-grid. In some states, you are legally required to maintain a connection to the grid even if you don't use it. Number 13 is composting human waste. The Humanure system, composting toilet waste into safe agricultural fertilizer, has been practiced by civilizations around the world for thousands of years. It was standard practice in rural America well into the 20th century, with outhouses and later composting systems handling what modern septic systems now do. Today, in most jurisdictions, any system for treating human waste must be an approved septic system, inspected and permitted. Composting toilets are legal in some states with permits, but fully closed-loop humanure systems that return nutrients to garden soil are illegal in most places. Subscribe now if you haven't already. We're just getting to the skills that most people have never even heard of. Number 12 is butchering wild game on your property. Harvesting deer and other wild game is legal with a license, but in many states there are regulations about how the animal must be handled, tagged, and transported. Taking a deer on your property, hanging it in your barn to age, and processing it in your kitchen without having it checked at a check station is technically a violation in many jurisdictions, even if the animal is legal, in season, and your land borders the woods where it was taken. Number 11 is open pollination breeding programs. Before the 20th century, every farmer who kept livestock was also a breeder. You selected the best animals, you bred them deliberately, you kept records and developed lines adapted to your operation. Today, the introduction of genetically modified organisms into commercial breeding lines has created a landscape where the genetics of commercial livestock are largely owned by a small number of corporations. Farmers who try to maintain independent breeding programs with traditional breeds operate outside a system that has little support infrastructure for them, and in some cases face disease testing and documentation requirements designed for commercial operations that make small-scale breeding programs practically impossible. Number 10 is gravity-fed water systems. Before electric pumps, rural farms often ran water from a spring or uphill cistern through pipes to the house and barn using nothing but gravity. These systems required no electricity, no mechanical pumps, no utility bills. They worked as long as the spring flowed. Today, regulations requiring approved water sources, testing, and treatment systems have made gravity-fed spring water systems legally complicated to establish or maintain, even on private land. Number 9 is making lye from wood ash. Every farm that made soap started with lye, and every farm made lye the same way. You ran water through a barrel of hardwood ash, collected the leachate, and boiled it down to the right concentration. The result was a caustic alkaline solution used to make soap, to cure olives and hominy, to preserve meat in certain traditional methods. Today, lye is a controlled or restricted substance in many jurisdictions because it is a precursor chemical for methamphetamine production. Buying or making lye in quantity can attract law enforcement attention, My great-grandmother made lye every spring and turned it into the soap that washed her family's clothes and dishes for the entire year. She would have found it completely incomprehensible that her soap pot could get her arrested. Number 8 is keeping a pig in a residential area. Pigs were the cornerstone of the American rural diet for centuries. Every farm family kept at least one pig, usually several. You fed them scraps. They converted waste into protein, and in November you had pork for the winter. Today, residential zoning in most areas outside of specifically agricultural zones prohibits keeping pigs. Even on rural property, some counties have minimum acreage requirements for livestock. The family pig that once fed children through the winter is now a zoning violation. Number 7 is practicing traditional midwifery. Before hospitals, before obstetrics as a medical specialty, women gave birth at home attended by midwives, women in the community who had delivered hundreds of babies and carried deep experiential knowledge of birth. Today, certified nurse midwives and certified midwives operate legally in most states, but certified professional midwives and traditional lay midwives operate in a complex legal landscape where their practice is illegal in some states, heavily regulated in others, and constantly under pressure from the medical establishment. The women who safely delivered generations of American babies now need to navigate licensing boards to do what their grandmothers did freely. Leave a comment telling me which of these 25 skills you think should be legal everywhere. I read every single one. Number 6 is keeping bees without registration. Beekeeping was once as common as keeping chickens. Every farm had a few hives. Honey was the primary sweetener. Wax was used for candles, lip balm, wood finishing, and waterproofing. Today, most states require beekeepers to register their hives with the State Department of Agriculture. The rationale is disease management, protecting commercial pollination operations from colony collapse and bacterial infections. But the registration requirement, inspections, and in some cases mandatory treatments have made backyard beekeeping a regulated activity that intimidates many beginners out of trying. Number 5 is blacksmithing and metal fabrication at home. The village blacksmith was the most important person in any rural community. He made the tools that planted the fields, the hardware that held buildings together, the hinges and hooks and blades that made daily life functional. He worked with fire and iron at temperatures that would alarm modern safety regulators considerably. Today, a home blacksmith operating a coal forge in a residential area faces noise complaints, fire code violations, zoning restrictions, and air quality regulations. Even on rural property, running a forge at night or in close proximity to neighboring properties can generate complaints that lead to orders to cease operations. Number 4 is making and selling food from your home kitchen. Before commercial food production regulations, if you made good jam, good bread, or good cheese, you sold it. You sold it at the church fair, at the farm stand by the road, to your neighbors. Home food production for sale was normal commerce. Today, commercial food production from a home kitchen is regulated at the state level under cottage food laws that vary enormously. Some states allow limited home food sales with few restrictions. Others require commercial kitchen inspections, licensing fees, and labeling requirements that effectively prohibit small-scale home food businesses. The woman who supported her family by selling her preserves at the county fair would need a state food handler's license to do it today. Number 3 is setting controlled burns. Before wildfire management was a government function, rural families burned their land. Controlled burns cleared brush, returned nutrients to soil, prevented the buildup of fuel that creates catastrophic wildfires, and maintained the open pasture and savanna ecosystems that had been managed by fire for thousands of years by indigenous peoples before European settlers arrived. Today, controlled burns require permits in most jurisdictions, and in many areas are prohibited, except for licensed burn managers. The tragic irony is that a century of fire suppression, driven partly by these very regulations, has created the fuel accumulation conditions that make modern wildfires so devastating. The families who once maintained their land with small, frequent burns were practicing a form of land management that modern fire ecology is now confirming was correct. Number 2 is practicing herbal veterinary medicine on your animals. Before veterinary licensing, before pharmaceutical companies that made animal medicines, Farmers treated their sick animals themselves. They knew which plant stopped a cow's bleeding, which root extract brought down a horse's fever, which poultice drew infection from a wound. They had no other choice. The nearest veterinarian might be 30 miles away, and a sick animal that died was a financial catastrophe. Today, treating your own animals with anything other than approved veterinary pharmaceuticals or performing procedures that are considered veterinary practice can constitute unlicensed practice of veterinary medicine in many states. The farmer who pulls a calf, sets a broken leg, or treats a cow's mastitis with a traditional herbal preparation exists in a legal gray zone that many states have been actively trying to close. Number 1 is the skill my grandfather was most proud of, the one he said he was most afraid we were losing, the one he spent the most pages on in that old leather notebook, and the one that I believe is the most important of all the 25 on this list: the ability to produce and preserve your own food through an entire year, using only what your land could grow and what your hands could make. This is not a single skill. It is a system of skills so interconnected that they rise and fall together. It begins in February with seed selection and starting, moves through March and April with soil preparation and early planting, accelerates through the growing months with cultivation, pest management, and succession planting, then pivots in August and September into the preservation season: canning, drying, fermenting, smoking, root cellaring, and carries through winter on the stores that summer produced. A family that can execute this complete cycle does not need a grocery store. They are not dependent on supply chains that can break, on refrigeration systems that can fail, on distribution networks that can be disrupted. They eat from their land, season after season, year after year. My grandfather did this his entire adult life. He raised 4 children through the Great Depression and World War II on what 12 acres of Virginia hill country could produce. He never went hungry, not once. Today, the skills that made this possible have been scattered. A little canning here, some backyard gardening there, maybe a small flock of chickens. But the complete system, the closed loop, year-round, total food self-sufficiency that my grandfather practiced, has been almost entirely lost. And the laws, regulations, and zoning ordinances we've covered in this video have made reconstructing that system genuinely difficult. Not impossible, but difficult. And that difficulty is not accidental. Here's what I want you to carry away from this video. These 25 skills were not illegal because they were dangerous. Most of them are less dangerous than the systems that replaced them. They were not regulated because they were ineffective. Most of them worked better for the people who practiced them than the commercial alternatives that followed. They were regulated, restricted, and in some cases criminalized because self-sufficient people are not profitable customers. A family that grows its own food, makes its own soap, collects its own water, and generates its own power is not buying enough of what the modern economy is selling. That is an uncomfortable thing to say, and I want to be careful not to oversimplify it. Some of these regulations were born from genuine public health concerns, and some of them protect real environmental and community interests. But the cumulative effect of a century of regulatory overlay on the skills of self-sufficient living has been to make ordinary American families dependent in ways their grandparents would have found incomprehensible and frightening. My grandfather closed that notebook, put it back in the drawer, and said something I have never forgotten. He said, "The most dangerous thing they ever did was make people forget that they don't need them." I'm not telling you what to do with that. I'm just telling you that he said it, and that I think about it every day. If you've watched this far, you're clearly someone who takes this seriously. Drop a comment below telling me which skill on this list you're already practicing, or which one you want to learn first. And share this video, because the more people who know what was taken from us, the more people might decide to take it back.